All right, here we are, objective number 3. So I know the last video was a little long. This one I'm hoping is a little bit shorter, and we're going to cover how you go about forming these entities and what sort of documents are necessary to maintain them. I talked about it a little bit during the entity chart video, but this one we'll talk specifically about how you actually form one of these entities. All right, so move myself up here. Okay, so in Washington, the way you form an entity is by going to the Secretary of State and you fill out a form. It's very fast nowadays because everything's on the internet. So you just go to the Secretary of State. It costs $200. Then you'll have your entity within a few days. Let's take a quick look at what the Secretary of State website looks like. So this is Kim Wyman, who as of now, which is 2019, is our elected Secretary of State. The Secretary of State does a few things. She manages elections as well as manages the filing of corporations. So you can see down here, when you scroll here, these are all the different things that that she's in charge of. And over here is the corporations. And if you go to the corporations page, you can actually search for any business and see whether they are a Washington organization or not. So let's do that. You don't have to actually be logged in for this to work. You can go down here and I can type in, you can see I've done this before. If I type in my name of my law practice, you'll actually see right here, let me get this out of the way. You see here, there's 2 entities. And this is because, this is delinquent. Okay, well, I have to file my annual report, which I thought I had done. Okay, so I guess I'll have to do that. But anyway, I originally formed a limited liability company, but at the time, the state of California didn't recognize those for law practices, so then I had to unwind it. You'll see it's inactive, and then I had to form my, formed a professional services corporation, and that's what the PS means. So if you click on that, you can see the various, the basic public information that's available about my entity. So I'm gonna, as soon as I'm done with this video, I'm gonna have to go file my annual report so I'm not delinquent. Okay, so, and that's, by the way, something you have to do every year. You have to file your annual report. You can see down here on the left side, it's a little blurry on this image, but that's when you file, when you create an entity, it creates this, the entity comes into existence when the Secretary of State says it does. And this document that you see on the left, the blue one with the gold seal of the state, is the birth certificate of the business. So this is the one for my law practice. And the third bullet here is really important to understand. Entities are created by states. There's no such thing as a federal corporation or a federal LLC. There are some, but not one that you'll ever encounter. For example, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are federally chartered institutions, but we don't need to get into that for now. If you go to form a business, you are going to be doing it in a state. It will exist in a state. That does not prevent it from doing business in other states, but it is created by state law, not by federal law. And that's important to understand. Okay, let's move on to the next screen here. Okay, so I mentioned this a little bit in the previous video, that all businesses, in order to conduct business in a state, have to have a license. And it's just a business license. And that business license requires the businesses to collect sales taxes and to pay other taxes. So we have in the state of Washington 2 kinds of taxes. We do not have an income tax. Most other states do, but we don't. And so you'll see here, and I'm going to try this. Apparently I have the ability to use, oh yeah, look at that. I have this pointer. Okay, see retail sales tax. This is the tax that came up when we talked about Wayfair. And this is a requirement that a business, when you sell retail goods, you have to collect and remit that tax to the states. And so that's a tax actually on your customers. That's not on you. But you also are required to pay in Washington, because we don't have an income tax, we do have what's called a gross receipts tax. It's called the B&O tax here. And what that is a tax on your sales, regardless of whether you make any money. So it's just a tax on every transaction, every sale transaction that you have, and it is for the quote-unquote privilege of doing business in the state of Washington. And using the roads and the courts and everything else that we have here, that's what that's supposed to pay for. So if you look over here on the left, you can see where our tax revenue comes from. In Washington, we are much more reliant on the sales tax and the gross receipts tax because we don't have an income tax. And so you see this big yellow box here, we don't have that in Washington. And that's why the purple box is bigger. We also have a property tax. So if you own real estate and also personal property, there's a tax on that for businesses. Individuals don't have to pay personal property tax, but businesses do. And then there's other fees and charges. But you can see just how reliant we are. 40% of Washington's revenue, government revenue, comes from the sales and gross receipts tax. So when we have a recession, the state of Washington is much more susceptible to that than other states that also have these other sources of revenue. Okay, I'm going to move myself here. I mentioned governing documents. Governing documents are, I mentioned them briefly. These are the documents that you need in order to govern your entity, in order to keep track of it, in order to determine what rights shareholders have, what the procedures are for holding meetings, all those kinds of things. Those are going to be in these documents. Sorry, I'm going to move myself over here again. It's kind of annoying me there. Okay, so in a corporation, when you create your entity, that form you fill out on the Secretary of State, that's called your articles. The bylaws are the agreement among the shareholders about how the company is going to be operated. Bylaws are not required, but it's a terrible idea to not have them. In an LLC, the certificate of formation is what you get from the Secretary of State when you form. The operating agreement is the agreement among the owners for how the company is going to be operated. So the articles are similar to the certificate of formation. The bylaws are similar to the operating agreement. Okay, and just like with bylaws, operating agreements are not required, but if you don't have one, you are stuck with whatever the default rules are in the law. So you have one anyway, it's just whatever the law says are the default rules. So it's a really terrible idea to have an LLC and not have an operating agreement. Partnerships, it depends on the kind of partnership. If it's a general partnership, there are no requirements. If it's a limited partnership, then you are issued a certificate of partnership, and then you have a partnership agreement, which is optional, just like the operating agreement and the bylaws. But it's the certificate of partnership that you get if you form a limited partnership. Again, remember, a general partnership just comes into existence on its own, and there's no filing with the Secretary of State required. And of course, in sole proprietorships, there's no such thing as required governing documents. You can have policies and procedures or whatever, but there's no legal requirement because, again, the business doesn't exist separate from its owner. Okay, that is all I have on Learning Objective 2. This video's, I guess I'm talking too much because the videos are running a little bit long. Hopefully this was helpful, and I'll see you in class.